3 hours.
Streaming offline.
Yeah, very refreshing.
There is something to I'm sure you wanted to like electronics in the classroom.
Awesome. If you want that off, is that going to distract you?
It will distract me. It will likely distract me.
So moving on.
I'll just stand here like fixing my hair the whole time. Dry shampoo.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start out just a little bit about our format today. We're going to have our seminar with 2 different speakers, and I'm going to invite Lucas up in a second to introduce them. We're going to have our introduction. We're going to have our first speaker open it up to some questions, and then have Lucas say thank you and introduce our second speaker, and then same format with questions. We're taping and live streaming today, so this way we can just keep everything rolling, and of course folks will join us from, as I understand it, from different sources also, and so as those questions come in or as opportunities present themselves, we can engage with even a broader audience, which certainly fits well with our seminars today. So with that, Lucas, I'll invite you to come up and do the introductions, and we'll get started.
Yeah. So, hi everyone. Thanks for coming to our transdisciplinary seminar today. My name is Lucas. I'm a SAS student here, and I'm just going to be introducing our speakers for today's seminar. So we have 2 speakers, Jayne Morrish and Dr. Jessica Blythe. So our first speaker is the Knowledge Mobilization Officer at Rocky's Lifespan Center, and her presentation will be discussing knowledge mobilization strategies. So please welcome Jayne Morrish.
Thanks. Hi guys, I'm Jayne. I'm going to be chatting with you about the basics of knowledge mobilization today. Just kind of go over what we're going to be chatting about. I'll do some introductions. I'm going to do an introduction to what knowledge mobilization is, because I know that a lot of you might not even know what those terms mean. And then I'll go into some actual knowledge mobilization strategies. It's heavy material. I'm kind of taking what they would usually teach in like a week course and putting it into 30 minutes for you. So please feel free, if you do have questions at one point, you're like, what does that term mean? You can ask now or save them for the end. You can also email me if there's any resources that I mentioned that you're interested in, and I will send my slides out as well, so you don't have to capture every piece of a definition that I talk about. So a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. So I am Jayne Morrish. I'm the Knowledge Mobilization Officer at Brock's Lifespan Center, which is one of the TD hubs here at the university. What I do in my role is I lead all of our knowledge mobilization efforts. I work with Brock researchers, specifically lifespan-based ones, to create their knowledge mobilization strategies. I spend a lot of my time writing grant applications, and then I take a major role in our current CIHR project scheme grant, which is led by the 2 co-directors of the center. A little bit of my background: I do have a master's in lifespan development from Brock, and then I have some applied experience in research evaluation and knowledge mobilization. So previous to my role here, I worked in the nonprofit field, specifically in injury prevention, so concussions and stuff like that. I used to work with the NFL, the NHL around concussions and injury, where I coordinated all the research and knowledge translation at the national nonprofit for that. I'm also a credentialed evaluator, which Ryan just learned about. You can become a credentialed evaluator in Canada. And then I also hold the Knowledge Translation Professional Certificate from U of T in St. Kitts, so that's why I know about KT. So I mentioned that I work at the Lifespan Center, but since I know a lot of you probably have no idea what that is or didn't even know that it existed, we are a multidisciplinary collaborative effort dedicated to studying human development across lifespan. We have special strengths in childhood and adolescence. We involve over 60 Brock faculty members, and it says 50 external organizations. We're up to 150 external organizations now. And basically what we do is we collaborate to study how people grow and change across their lives. We have faculty that study things from how little ones develop their ability to tell lies, all the way up into how memory declines or even becomes a little bit more specialized when you become an older adult. Being part of an academic institution, our members actively publish in the scientific literature, which is a really great way to spread knowledge among scholars. But we did notice that there was a gap where we weren't always communicating our great research information, especially because it's so applicable, because one commonality between all of us in this room is that we're children at one point, so development applies to us on some scheme of things. We were not communicating that knowledge out. So our solution was to start mobilizing our knowledge, which is how my job was created, and I'm thankful for that. Before I move on to kind of the meat of today's presentation, I want to let you know why this is relevant to you, so you don't just think that some weird person from Brock told you about knowledge mobilization. This is actually really important for you if you want to at any point go into academia, or if you're at any point interested in moving into any kind of research field. So first, knowledge mobilization is a really important part of the research process. It's really about bridging that gap between research and application. Second, it is incredibly important for grants, even graduate level funding at this point. There is an increasing interest being placed on knowledge mobilization in academia. At some universities, they're requiring professors to put knowledge mobilization on their CVs, and that's actually taken into account when they do their tenure applications. It's also a really key transferable skill set. So being an expert in knowledge mobilization is a unique way to kind of define yourself as an academic. The last piece is it is incredibly applicable to jobs outside of academia. So jobs in knowledge mobilization are coming up every day. I get emails about them. I see probably 8 a week. And they're at nonprofits. They're like the region right now is hiring for a knowledge mobilization advisor. Almost every government organization has a knowledge mobilization team. Every hospital has a knowledge mobilization team. So there's a lot of jobs, and what they're looking for in those jobs is people that A, understand knowledge mobilization, but also understand research. So that's perfect for grad students who may not want to go into academia. So I've mentioned that I do this for a living, but what on earth is it? So let's talk about knowledge translation first, which is commonly referred to as KT. This can be considered the umbrella term for the process of moving research or evidence into practice. The Canadian Institute of Health Research defined KT as a dynamic and iterative process that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and ethically sound application of knowledge to improve the health of Canadians, provide more effective health services and products, and strengthen the healthcare system. Moving beyond that really technical definition, knowledge translation is really about taking created knowledge like research and working with various individuals to exchange and apply it in a way that allows for benefits to the individuals that can use that knowledge. So this can be for the public, for policymakers, for practitioners, or even just for other researchers. Then there's knowledge mobilization, which refers to the movement of created knowledge into active use. This really comes down to ensuring that the right information is available to the right people at the right time and in the right format so as to influence decision making. So with knowledge mobilization, you're really moving the knowledge that exists into action with the people that can use it. This results in evidence-based decision making and evidence-informed practice. More than just bridging the gap, knowledge mobilization seeks to make connections between research and expertise and policy and practice in order to improve outcomes and impacts. Knowledge mobilization is a proactive process that involves specific efforts to build relationships and bring in partners and bridge connections between those people. This is the term I subscribe to, so I'm going to be talking about knowledge mobilization today, not knowledge translation. To make more complex, we have other terms. We've got knowledge creators, so that refers to individuals who create new knowledge. So researchers that I work with, when they are conducting research, they are considered knowledge creators. So Ryan, you are a knowledge creator. You should put that on your CV.
Sure.
We have knowledge users, referring to the individuals who use created knowledge. These are anyone. CHR defines a knowledge user as an individual who's likely to be able to use research results to make informed decisions about health policies, programs, or practices. This can include researchers can be knowledge users. When they're reading other people's journal articles, they are a knowledge user in that point. But typically it's things like policymakers, the general public, or partners or other partner organizations. There's knowledge exchange, which is becoming much more popular as of right now in the KM literature. referring to the collaborative approach between knowledge creators and knowledge users, which results in shared learning while working through the processes of implementing and understanding knowledge. So this term kind of describes the process of discussion and collaboration that should exist between knowledge creators and knowledge users. There's knowledge brokering. This is where a lot of jobs are coming up. You'll see knowledge brokering jobs pop up. Knowledge brokering basically refers to the facilitation of connections between knowledge creators and knowledge users. So in my job, I'm actually really kind of a knowledge broker. I have 1 foot in academia, I have 1 foot in the public realm, and I bridge connections between the two to make sure that our research gets out into the public, but also that our researchers know what the public wants. There's a lot of terms. I totally know that. And depending on who you're talking to, you're going to be told that the key underlying term for this field is different. For some people, one example, some people really subscribe to KT. And like, I've seen fights at conferences over this. Like, they are very specific about which term they want. CIHR uses knowledge translation. This is what the healthcare field uses. If you are ever at a hospital, if you are applying for a CIHR grant, you're a knowledge translator. Knowledge mobilization, I feel like people are more moving towards that now. That's what SSHRC uses. If you are applying for a SSHRC grant, you are a knowledge mobilizer. I like this term because I feel like knowledge mobilization really gets at what this field is about, which is moving knowledge into action to have impact, and it describes a bidirectional relationship between knowledge creators and knowledge users. In the business world, there's the term knowledge management. More recently, we've seen the emergence of the term K-STAR, which is an attempt to amalgamate the knowledge blank words into one. This is where the fights start, because they started having K-STAR conferences, and then people were coming and there were like sign stuff. It was very complex. It was academics. A lot of jargon, even though they're knowledge mobilizers and shouldn't be using jargon. It was quite entertaining. And then there's implementation science, which is a more old school term. If you are applying for a US grant, you are an implementation scientist, because the US has yet to subscribe to the term knowledge mobilization. There is considerable overlap between these terms. I get it. I get how stupid all of that is. I totally understand it. I get it. If you search me on Brock's directory, I am the knowledge mobilization officer, because I currently hold a CIHR. I am the knowledge translation officer if CIHR ever asks you guys that question. Hopefully CIHR is not currently watching this webinar. For example, the term knowledge. So the term knowledge translation implies that knowledge is like an object. Like, I have this new knowledge, I can pass it on to you. That's why healthcare uses this, because typically in healthcare, this drug will work better. You can pass that knowledge on. Whereas knowledge mobilization, it kind of gets at the idea that it's more than just about disseminating information. It's not just about sharing information or one-way information flow. It's about engagement, end-user participation, attention to impact. And evidence doesn't always mean research. It can mean information from how programs are working, practice-based information. And this is all about kind of the co-production of knowledge, working together, and there has to be a bidirectional flow between people that have the knowledge and people that want to use the knowledge. Regardless of the term, the underlying intent is really simple in all cases. This field exists to take research and make sure that it matters more in actual practice, and that research has practical-based pieces built into it from the inception of the research. So if you guys are interested in learning more about this, I threw a citation up there. It's a really good journal article called Lost in Knowledge Translation Time for a Map. It describes it way better than I do. And if you're interested more in knowledge mobilization, just check the citations for that on Google Scholar. There's some good ones around knowledge mobilization as well. All that aside, the process is super, super simple. It's all about having a feedback loop between people and research, and making sure that our research gets into the hands of people that can use it, and that we then take the information from those people to further inform our research processes. So really quick rundown of what KT and KM are. One of the biggest questions I get at every cocktail party I'm at is, what do you do? Do you speak a lot of languages? Why does this field exist? Like, why do you have a job? So I pull up my handy-dandy computer and show them this slide. There's something called the knowledge to action gap. And basically, that's where research is not always making it into the hands of people that can use it. This is due largely in part to two main issues. First is a failure on the part of knowledge creators to appropriately share their knowledge. Second is a failure on the part of knowledge users to appropriately act on knowledge. It's definitely not a new issue. I'm going to show you guys a quick video that demonstrates kind of the knowledge to action gap in action long before any of us were born. I hope the sound works.
Do you have time for a quick story? I thought you might. A long time ago, an unknown illness impacting men at sea led to the failure of many expeditions. In 1497, a voyage led by Vasco da Gama experienced one of the earliest outbreaks. After 6 months at sea, most of his crew had fallen ill. In 1601, Captain James Lancaster set sail with a fleet of 4 ships. One ship was given lemon juice while the others weren't. The ship given lemon juice suffered fewer losses. Nearly 150 years later, British Navy physician James Lind developed an experiment to test possible cures. 12 men displaying typical symptoms of scurvy were divided into pairs. Within a few days, the pairs given oranges and lemons got better. In 1795, the British Navy took action, and the provision of lemon juice became routine. 70 years later, the shipping industry joined in, and citrus became mandatory. So, from the time citrus was suspected to be a remedy for scurvy to the time it became a part of policy for sailors, nearly 4 centuries had passed. The moral of the story? Failing to share and act on evidence can be a major problem. Today, there is more healthcare evidence than ever, but figuring out how to apply it poses a big challenge to those who work in healthcare.
So we can see that this gap has probably existed for a fairly long time. Focusing just on the healthcare system, as that's the place where we can get the biggest stats. What we see right now is around 30 to 40% of patients may not be receiving care that adheres to evidence, and 20 to 25% of care may not be needed or may actually be harmful. And this is where the field of knowledge mobilization comes in, creating a bridge between the knowledge creators and the knowledge users in order to get the most updated and relevant information into practice. Repeating something I said earlier, this field exists in order to get the right information into the hands of the right people at the right time in the right format so as to influence decision making. This need for mobilized knowledge has been recognized on a world stage. As reported in the 2004 World Health Organization's World Report on Knowledge for Better Health, they take the stance that stronger emphasis should be placed on translating knowledge into action to improve public health by bridging the gap between what is known and what is actually being done. And both knowledge creators and knowledge users need to remember this. They both have the ability to help spur this process on. Knowledge creators can be a little bit more stubborn about that. They're not always great at sharing their research. A lot of times they'll say it's just one journal article. What is this going to do? No, you can never say that can. We only use the word may in research. Knowledge users are a little bit more open because they're dying to get research. They need this information to further what they're doing. And this is basically why knowledge mobilization has created that. Knowledge mobilization has been created at a university level, so people like me can sit there and help that process along. So this knowledge action gap may not be the top of everyone's mind. There is another huge reason to focus on knowledge mobilization that is at the top of everyone's mind, specifically researchers, and that's funding. So the integration of a knowledge mobilization component is becoming a common requirement for almost all funding agencies, be that through the government or just external funding applications. And this is even at the graduate level. Reviewers are looking more kindly upon applications that can effectively comment on knowledge mobilization. This is even beyond the Tri-Council agencies. About a year ago, I worked with someone from the Faculty of Applied Health Science to apply for a grant to the Dairy Farmers of Canada, and they had a 2-page knowledge mobilization section, and that's even more in-depth than what SHRP requires. I just wrote a Vanier scholarship application, and that person is actually making their whole application around how they are a rising star in knowledge mobilization, and that's going to make her application incredibly unique compared to the other people applying for Vanier that year. Basically what's happening is that through including knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization, funders see that they can help to ensure that their benefits or their investments have applied benefits, longevity beyond set funding periods, increased returns to society, and basically they see that including this gives them more bang for their bucks. As such, in order to compete in the fast-paced world of research, being able to comment on how you understand knowledge mobilization and how you have that built into your own research program is incredibly attractive. Even for CIHR, which I know some of you probably will not be applying for, they have now a separate box that you can tick, which is called "My application is an integrated knowledge translation." You then get put into a smaller, less competitive pool. And these are for all of their grants. So if you're going for $4 million and you're suddenly not in a pool of hundreds, you're in a pool of 10 people. So it's incredibly attractive, and it does make it more, I would say, easy to get grants, and it opens up different grants that you can apply for. Beyond grants, knowledge mobilization is really becoming an integral piece of the research and implementation. In my opinion, this renewed focus on knowledge mobilization is really changing the research process. I also feel that it's changing kind of the university atmosphere as well. We see an increased focus on community engagement, an increased focus on partnerships, and funding dollars going towards that at a university level. First, as I mentioned, there definitely has and will continue to be an impact on grants. Basically, everyone's seeing that including this in their grants will give them more impact for any research that they fund. Next, there's a growing emphasis on outputs, outcomes, and impacts of research. In every grant application, you now have to fully comment on those, tie them back to your budget, and tie them back to your knowledge mobilization plan. There's a new focus on open access. So a lot of granting agencies now require you to either make sure that every journal that you publish in is open access. SHRC requires that. Every journal that you say you're going to publish in has to be open access, or it has to be open access within a year. There's a new focus on large research databases that are being required, especially if you're doing kind of government level funding, like the Public Health Agency of Canada. And then there's also a renewed focus on plain language material. Another piece that's coming up is equitable knowledge sharing. So granting agencies and funding agencies are expecting people to be able to comment on why their knowledge mobilization strategies are equitable. And basically what that means is that if you have research that's applicable to individuals that don't speak English, but you publish all your materials in English, that's not equitable knowledge sharing. So they're actually hoping that you are able to comment on that within your own writing. There's also a new focus on partnerships and the co-creation of knowledge. Funding agencies want to see that when you come up with a research question, you've already talked to the end users before you even decided on that, and that your question is based in an actual identified need. Where I think all this is going next is going to be knowledge mobilization evaluation. Right now, we don't have any kind of idea of what the best practices are for knowledge mobilization. So basically people will be like, I'm going to write a blog because I think blogs are fun. But we don't know if blogs are actually the most impactful way to do knowledge mobilization. Right now, everyone's saying they're going to do a podcast. That's great, but is that the best way to get research knowledge across? We don't know. So I think that there will be a whole new piece opening up around knowledge mobilization evaluation. Just so you can kind of get an idea of how all of this can come together at an academic institution, I'm going to go over what we do at the Lifespan Center, just so you kind of can get an idea. In terms of knowledge mobilization theory, we recognize that there's a lot of different theories out there. This is a very messy field right now because there's so many people trying to get a piece of it, and there's no kind of cohesive, we are doing knowledge mobilization, and this is how you should do it. So we've kind of done our own hybrid model. We've pulled together what we see as kind of the best practices and the most highly evaluated practices. And I've settled on something called the co-production of knowledge. And this involves consistently developing and supporting approaches and processes that combine the sources of knowledge and the beneficiaries of that knowledge to interactively move towards a common direction, such as meeting an identified community need. And this is actually straight from our website. At the center, we focus on collaborative and integrated knowledge mobilization, working with our local, provincial, national, and international partners from a variety of sectors to co-create research that has true application outside of the university. And overall, this term basically describes the process in which knowledge creators and knowledge users work together to understand and meet their common, as well as uncommon, interest, needs, and goals. And in order to support the co-production of knowledge, we recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all, so we don't go in saying, this is what you need to do. We always do this. We understand that for each research process, it has to be unique, it has to be different, and we have to start that before we even think of the research question and before we put that grant in, which is why usually a year out before we apply for a grant, I'm already meeting with researchers to do their KT and KM plan with them. And if you're interested more in that, we actually just got published in the U of T and Hospital for Sick Children Knowledge Translation Special Certificate Casebook. We represent the education sector. I can send the link for that around because it kind of describes how we came up with this theory and how it all works together. And we're just excited that we got in there. So, talking about how we do this, I'm going to talk about some of our specific strategies and then kind of go into more unique strategies that you might be interested in. Our key knowledge mobilization strategies focus first on social media, which we're going to hear about later. We also produce infographics and newsletters. On top of that, when we are producing infographics and newsletters, if we're working with a partner and they're like, no, what we like to do toolkits, then that day we're toolkit creators. We work on whatever kind of end product works best for our partners and our end users. We just find right now that infographics and newsletters are the best. We also do research snapshots, and then we have a speaker series, which is called the Lifespan Speaker Series, Research That Can Inform Your Life. Those are just free community events where either one of our Lifespan faculty members speak with a community panel of partners, or we actually just invite partners to come in to speak on a given topic. We typically see 300 to 400 community members come out for those, which is pretty great for a community event on a Wednesday evening at Brock. Usually on Alzheimer's or something like that, because older adults love this stuff. These are samples of our infographics. Basically, an infographic is a great visual way to get your research across, getting at your kind of single most important messages, your bottom line messages, and each kind of section of these infographics links back to a given journal article. So you can click on it, it'll take you back to the journal article if you want more, or it'll direct you back to the faculty member's website. We often try to co-create these with our partners. So for this child and mental health one, at the top, we talked about the research that we knew with our partners. Then we worked with the 2 local school boards to have these pieces here on what they can do with that research. So it kind of tells the story. This is what's going on. This is what schools should do. These are a couple of different ones that we just put out. For the one that is on the right, it's called BHYPE Early Results. BHYPE is our CIHR grant. Each of those sections you can then click on. It'll then take you to an expanded infographic, more on that information. We just, on our original one, our main one, we put prevalence data. And we put prevalence data on there because it's the easiest to understand. 60% of kids do activities. But then if you click on that, it'll take you to one where we talk about the interactions that we're seeing with our more kind of in-depth statistics. And the Stress at Brock one is a piece around retention here at Brock that was done for the senior admin. And it actually was a booklet of infographics. These are 2 examples of our research snapshots. So these are just fully plain language. I'd probably say it's about a grade 6 level is what level we aim for. And they all link back to a specific journal article. They're surprisingly popular. They take a long time to write, though. If you look at this one, brain activity, peers, and personality, associations with adolescent risk-taking. We literally there have to talk about how the prefrontal cortex isn't mature enough in adolescence to control risk-taking behaviors. It's not the easiest thing to summarize. And it takes a lot of going back and forth between myself and the researcher to settle at a place where they're comfortable with the certain amount of jargon I've removed and the certain pictures that I've picked. That can be an interesting point as well. Beyond those strategies, the ones that we focus on, there's tons of different things that you can do to do knowledge mobilization. Typically, they can be broken down into the following categories. You can create products. So that would be things like newsletters, fact sheets, FAQs, webinars, podcasts, or even just a website as a product that you can create based on your research. You can hold events. So those would be things like conferences, workshops, a presentation. Right now, this is a knowledge mobilization strategy for us that would fall under events. You can also do networks. So again, that would be things like social media. Communities of practice are becoming incredibly popular right now. Or even just holding an online discussion board on a given topic. In terms of knowledge mobilization in academia, when you are applying for a grant, there are some common things that are usually put in for knowledge mobilization strategies. The first one is publications. That's probably the easiest, quickest way for an academic to mobilize their research, recognizing that will only be for other researchers typically, and you have to keep in mind that open access piece, that some of the times those journal articles need to be open access. Conferences is another great way to mobilize your knowledge. I would say on that one, it's also important to include non-academic conferences. Training with other researchers, talking about the information that you found, some new methods, some new tools is another way. For all of these, because these are probably the easiest ways to do it in academia, It's important to remember the resources you have at your university. So even you as graduate students can go to our marketing communications department and get support with your knowledge mobilization. They can help you craft newsletters, they can help you craft media releases, things like that. You also have your research office that you can go to. We have a SSHRC research officer that you can go to. Now that you've known me, you can email me if you want, even though you're not Lifespan, we'll just ignore that part. You can definitely email me. And you also have resources within your center to go to as well. Beyond specific strategy levels, there's some kind of really easy theory-based things that you should remember when you're doing knowledge mobilization strategies. And this is all about making sure that your research sticks. To do this, you can follow what are called the stickiness principles. It comes from my absolute favorite non beach read book, which is called Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. It's actually a really fun read. And basically, this book has the idea that you can make your knowledge that you have more applicable and have more longevity if you follow these different principles to make your research and your information stick. So the first one that they talk about is simplicity. Basically, it's the idea that if you say 3 things to someone, you're likely saying nothing because they're not going to listen to any of it once you've gotten past one thing for them to remember. So basically, when you're mobilizing research, you need to understand that you have to be incredibly simplistic. You can't try to say too many things. You wouldn't write a journal article summarizing 28 studies. You want to focus on one main piece. In this, they talk about getting at your SMITs and your BLAMs. Your SMIT is your single most important thing, and your BLAM is your bottom line actual message. So always figure what those are when you're trying to even write a journal article, and just make sure that you're cycling back to that even at your discussion piece. The next one is being unexpected. People are used to hearing a lot of information. How much information have you guys taken in today? Tons. How many signs have you seen today? Tons. So basically, if you want the research that you're working on to have any traction, you need to make sure that your audiences are paying attention to your message and understand why it's relevant to them. Next, you need to make sure that you are being concrete with your messages. You need to avoid the abstract when you're explaining things. I've seen some people try to equate their research to some abstract thought that doesn't make any sense. It has to be a tangible piece that people can grasp, and it has to be relevant to what they're doing. Next, you need to make sure that you're giving your idea credibility. The world is full of skeptics. Human beings are naturally conditioned to question messages. So you need to make sure that you give your idea believability. And then there's the emotional side, which you need to work into your knowledge mobilization. This is a really strong way to do it. When you touch on the emotional side to a subject, you help your audiences relate and feel connected. This is great for you guys as well, because if your research is focused on environmental sustainability, that is something that's applying to everyone. We are all living in the world. This is something that is relevant to me, even if it may not touch my life right now. Focusing on the emotional helps to make the issues real for people, make it relevant to their lives, and empowers them through the use of narrative. So it's a lot of information, a lot of stuff that I've told you to do. But beyond that, knowledge mobilization can be really fun. I absolutely love my job. I get to talk about cool research every day and think of fun and exciting ways to mobilize it. To give you some ideas of outside of the box knowledge mobilization, I'm going to show you 2 videos from a fantastic group called the Fun Theory. Basically, what the Fun Theory's preface is that you can make behaviors the desirable behavior, any behavior change desirable, if you just make it the fun and easy way to do it. So when you watch these videos, watch how they've incorporated their research messages completely seamlessly in what they've done, and they haven't even made anyone realize that they're being mobilized to. It's just, I want to do that because that looks fun. I want to change my behavior and believe that because this is the fun thing to do, and it came naturally. There's tons of these online. These are just my two favorite. Okay, I get that those are totally pie in the sky. We're not going to be making piano staircases around campus or putting Super Mario effects onto our hand sanitizers. But basically, the underlying message here is that you can make knowledge mobilization really fun. Research is a curiosity-oriented field. I don't think anyone in this room got into research because they didn't think that, hey, I want to answer that question. I want to understand this. So of course, I imagine that the goal of that would also be to make sure that your research has impact. No one's written a journal article to be like, I hope no one reads this ever. There's a goal, like the goal here is to make it matter to someone. And it doesn't have to be all boring pieces like I'm going to write this toolkit. You can think of creative things, and there are some really great toolkits out there. There's some really great resources out there to do creative knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization. We have Marilyn I. Walker. You can do arts-based knowledge mobilization where you maybe have a play based on your research. Those are all unique ways to translate it, and all ways that are being looked upon really friendly right now for granting applications. Some key final messages to think about when you're doing knowledge mobilization. Always try to offer more. People consume information in different ways. Don't just always like, I'm going to always do conferences and publications. Using multiple strategies to reach your audience is generally more effective. Actively engage. By actively engaging your audience, you can help to bring about change. Consider how you can interact with and involve your audience in shaping your message. So that gets at the co-production of knowledge piece, which is, I think, kind of the pinnacle, the gold standard for doing knowledge mobilization right now. Keep it real. Think about what your audience needs. Think about what they care about. Package messages in a way that it's easy for people to apply in their day-to-day lives. Reach out. Consider developing a communication strategy to plan out how you'll deliver your message to your audience. Again, you can go to our Marcom department here to help with that. You can also email me at any point if you want help with that. Think big. Consider the potential of mobilizing this knowledge. With an effective message, you can generate awareness, change old ways of thinking, and inspire action. So that is it for my super quick, this is knowledge translation in a little bit more than 30 minutes. Do you guys have any questions? I put my contact information up there. I will send out the slides. I'll append in the slides some information on how to write in plain language as well, just because I couldn't fit that in today, so you can have that. Any questions? I was just so clear at mobilizing my knowledge. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so under future, the future element was knowledge mobilization evaluation. That strikes me as the whole presentation is a lot being thrown at the wall, and nobody is looking to see what's sticking.
Yep.
Why is that a future issue and not the most pressing matter right now?
So in my world, it's the most pressing matter. I think that some people are just at this point trying to tell people that knowledge mobilization is important. Not many universities are seeing that they need to have KM support in their Office of Research Services. You're having people like Ryan or people like my boss is saying, this is important, I'm going to hire someone in my center. There's no one at Brock, there's no knowledge mobilization at Brock beyond me, and I work for the Lifespan Center. So at this point, we're just trying to argue to say this is important, it's an important piece of academia. And then what I see is happening is people that are being trained, which is another key component. If you want to hire a knowledge mobilization person, they should be trained, because training right now is saying if you are doing these things, there needs to be an evaluation component built in. So every strategy that we put out, I have full key performance indicators and full metrics that are measured. So we never release a website unless I have full backend built in that I can track who is visiting it, who is looking at it, who's opening our emails, so I can have that to see which strategies work the best for us. So I think that's it. I think we're at a point where we're just trying to be like, look at us, we're important. And then we'll get at the point being like, this is what works. But if you talk to any of the leaders in the field, the big leader right now is a doctor named Melanie Barwick at Sick Kids. And this is what she talks about every day. And then there's also the unfortunate piece that it's hard to publish evaluation data. It's not always easy to, where would you publish it, right? And what researcher wants to get on board to get a grant to get evaluation data when they want a publication to do this to help with their tenured application. So it's just a bit tricky. So what we really need is people in these knowledge mobilization roles that have trained knowledge mobilization skills and trained in evaluation. I fully, this keeps me up at night. Why are we doing newsletters? Does this impact anyone at all? Yeah.
I want to pick up on your comments about kind of the situation at Brock, but more broadly in the delay behind when we saw knowledge blank be required in all these different areas. And so then a twofold question. Number one, why would we anticipate academics would have any idea how to actually mobilize knowledge? Like so many other things, it's often not part of their training and they fail miserably at it. And so that's question one. Why all of a sudden has this made its way into a sphere when we expect academics to do it with no preparation? And then the second part of my question is, why do you think there's been such a delay in the response on institutions where now we have this as a requirement in grants, we have researchers that are not trained and ill-equipped to do it, but we haven't seen an institutional response to put a priority on it. So one of the reasons that I wanted to invite you to have you here is, you're a superstar in this area. Come on, you're being modest, but at Brock,
I make great infographics.
At Brock, you are the only person I know of to actually call in. We have 600 faculty, all of whom are struggling in this area. So just, I guess, a commentary or some insight you might have on that.
Yeah. I think that it popped up. I don't think we were looking for this to happen. I think we weren't expecting this to happen in academia. And then I think with the rise of the internet, the rise of access to information, and I do think that people are becoming more intelligent consumers of information, so they know they want information. So I think that kind of, we weren't watching that. We were watching how to get grants and what are the coolest topics. We weren't thinking about that piece of people that can use our knowledge. I think we've also seen a huge rise in social enterprises and not-for-profits that can't hire academics but need academic information to get their programs out. So I don't think we were expecting this. That is now we're trying to catch up to train academics. Right now, Bishop's University is actually in the process of getting a knowledge mobilization graduate program started. Yes. I will be adjunct faculty there, which is pretty cool. So they're in the process right now of getting that approved. It will be the first knowledge mobilization graduate program in the world, which is pretty awesome. So I think I think we didn't expect it to happen, and now we're trying really, really quick to catch up. What's happening, I think, at the university level? Budgets, right? The baby boom bust. We don't have as many students as we used to. I know that Brock has better enrollment this year, which is amazing, and we're a great school. We're still at the point where budgets are very tight. So the first thing that often can get cut is knowledge mobilization. You can still get a grant without having it. It's not the most critical piece. I personally think it's fairly important, but it's not knowledge mobilization doesn't keep the lights on, kind of thing. I think that if we don't start thinking about it now, 5 years from now, we're going to be up a certain creek without a paddle, because I think that it's going to become a critical component in research applications going forward, because we are getting more researchers coming for competing for ever decreasing pots of money. You're going to want to give it to the superstars, and the superstars that say this will change the world. That's the applications they want to see now, and they want to know how you're going to change the world. Those are my thoughts.
The first time I heard the term was 4 weeks ago when I came here, and
Which is terrifying to me. Yeah. But it's the world. Yeah.
yeah. When did the term first
Come up. 2005. I think implementation science has been around for a very long time. That's a much more old school term. You can talk to people that have.
I was going to ask you, that was my next question. What do we used to call it?
Implementation science.
Okay.
So the science of implementing knowledge, and that's still what the U.S. calls it. And right now, Canada is the only country that even has training you can go to. We've got training through University of Guelph, U of T, and St. Mike's, and those are the only credentialed training right now for knowledge translation, knowledge mobilization in the world.
So how did you get into this? What were you doing?
Yeah, okay, that's my story. So I have a degree in developmental psychology, specifically developmental neuroscience. I studied how and why teens take risks and what's going on with that, which then relates to outcome injury behaviors. My undergrad is in memory and neuroscience. It's a very weird path. Came here to do my master's, realized that I absolutely hated those. I didn't want to do statistics. I wanted to come up with cool research questions that had an impact, and I wanted to, that piece where you're writing a journal article at the end where it's implications, love it. That was my favorite thing. Went back to the nonprofit that I was working at. They put me on secondment kind of when I went to grad school, and I realized I was called their research coordinator, but I wasn't doing research. I was going to my friends in academia, getting their knowledge and putting it into practice in our programs. That's not research. So I was struggling with this idea of saying I'm a researcher when I was totally just not a researcher. I was doing something else. I started networking, and I found this knowledge translation course at Sick Kids. I took it. It sounds so silly, but it legitimately changed my life. I sat there and I was like, this is what I am. That's how I found it. I was struggling with this concept of calling myself a researcher when I was really implementing and didn't know what I wanted, what I was. Found the course, and that kind of is how it went to me. They also, at Sick Kids and FY, they have a 2-day scientist training in knowledge translation as well. That's really good for academics, if you're looking for a life-changing piece as well. But that's how I got. It's very weird. I got to this point where I was research, but I wasn't really research, and I, through networking, found this course.
How do the folks in communications feel about this?
I think they love it because they see that they have a role in it, right? As a knowledge mobilization person, I do not have strong skill sets in community. I don't want to write media releases and stuff like that, but that is a key component of knowledge mobilization. I see communications departments as a key linchpin in this. So I think we actually work really well together, and they're kind of the early adopters for knowledge mobilization. They don't want to help write grants. They don't want to come up with the planning strategy, but they would love to be included in grants as a key strategy or method that you can use. So I think we've worked really well together.
It made sense when I read the reading, was it Ian Graham?
Yeah.
In the context of the health field, it totally makes sense to me how it works and how it comes together, and the gap of taking your research and putting it into action. I wish I had actually read that article first. It would have been helpful.
Would have helped. And I think that's where we're getting, healthcare. I think we're early adopters to KT because they obviously need research to improve healthcare practices. And I think social sciences and the natural sciences are following up now because they see that social innovation and social impact are becoming very big words. There are think tanks just dedicated to that. So I think the social science world and the humanities world are now catching up to what healthcare has already done.
So I want to find out, having worked with academia, what are the greatest challenges you've seen working with them? what is the acceptance level like?
I have slides on this that I did not show. So I can include all of those as well. Publish or perish mentality, 100%. Knowledge translation is not the first thing that the academics wake up in the morning saying, like, I need to make an infographic. Ryan might, my boss Tina and my boss Sid probably do. But it's not like it's a fast-paced world. Research is you publish or you perish. If you have a grant and it's a 5-year grant and you're a superstar because you got 1.5 million, you better be publishing. And knowledge mobilization doesn't always lend to publication. So it often can be the first thing that gets cut. I think that's a big thing that I struggle with. Another big thing is getting researchers who are very much married to the idea of jargon and the importance of, no, we have to talk about how I did my hierarchical multiple regression analysis. Like, that's the key part of this research process. Then I have to be like, no one knows what that word means. We can't put that in an infographic, I'm sorry. And then also getting at the fact that, right? And then on top of it, a lot of my audiences, they want prevalence data. They want to know how many kids are vaping. They want to know how many kids are, and what the emergence of vaping behaviors is. They don't want to know how vaping behaviors might relate to outcome shyness variables. Like that's also, but that's like a research project that people would like. They want to talk about interactions. They want to do complex statistics. So that piece can be challenging, right? Like especially, that was a recent learning, that Blythe infographic that's all prevalence. We initially started that. We wanted to talk about these complex interactions between antisocial behaviors and, antisocial behaviors and sleep behavior patterns with a sleep phase delay. And I was like, no one's going to read this. Like, they won't. I'm going to send it out to our parents, and they're going to be like, what are you doing? My kid's out of the study. So that's a really challenging piece, getting people to move away from you're trained as an academic to love jargon. Jargon is important. You need to include these pieces. You need to talk about your hierarchical multiple regression analysis. That's what makes you cool among your academic friends. But it does not make you cool when you're doing an infographic. So that's a big piece, trying to get and also the can versus may. Like every academic's also changed. Like, no, it's just one article. It doesn't actually mean anything for the world. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have some place in me to tell a story about what this research can do. So we now have to find this like happy in between where I'm saying that this is information that might be useful for you if you are interested in youth vaping behaviors, rather than being like, this is the important piece, that this is the linchpin. So that's my big ones, I would say, the publish or perish, and then we talk very different languages, and we have to somehow lean into being uncomfortable. Thankfully, I most of the time win, and we have our infographics with our prevalence data.
So we're going to have to sort of cut it off there.
You can email me.
We're already well past, so I apologize for that. But everyone, please take Jayne's information.
And I will send the slides for sure. And I'll switch for you to go.
All right. Thanks, Jayne.
Sorry, I'm back here.
Okay. Don't want to leave before you get your gift. Thank you so much for coming. And
thank you.
I really thought it was interesting, particularly when you talked about the knowledge, the gap between the knowledge and practice. And I think it'll give us a lot to reflect on, as well, making research stick more and matter more in practical terms. So thank you very much for coming.
And we'll all meet at 10 to make a staircase on campus.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. All right. So our next talk will be presented by the newest member of FCIRC, and she was going to explain a little bit more about how we can get more out of social media for our academic work as well. So yeah, please welcome Dr. Jessica Blythe.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Just give us 1 minute. I'll switch over the slides. Touch screen. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome back. It's going to be a really nice compliment, I think, so well planned, everyone.
We're doing well.
What I'm going to be talking about today is how social media can be useful for us as academics, and particularly one of the things that it's great at is helping us communicate better, but there are some other reasons too, and I'll walk through them. Just a disclaimer, I'm mostly focusing on Twitter today, but I love that Jayne pointed out that we need a multi-pronged strategy, so this is just one of the tools that is available to us, but for me, I found it to be fun, which is important. I enjoy it. It's quick for me. It's intuitive, and I like it. So that's one of the reasons. So this doesn't necessarily have to be your go-to tool for social media as an academic, but it's one of the ones that is quite useful and can be quite powerful. So that's why I'm focusing on it. So just a quick overview, it's sort of three sections. The first one is trying to convince everyone in the room, no one in particular, why tweeting is potentially really useful to us as academics. Second is a little bit of how we develop a really effective presence online, and that can be something that we put some thought into, and it can be a little bit more successful depending on how you do it. And then third, I've just got a couple comments on a few of the details of how you actually navigate that space. And I would just like to give credit to two really brilliant scientists who I was very fortunate to learn from. So 5 years ago, I was just starting a postdoc in Australia, and I got to sit outside under a palm tree, so apologies for not recreating that environment. And we had sort of just a lunchtime casual conversation with two of the big hitters in my field in social media, in particular on Twitter. So Jody Brummer is a physiologist, and Emily Darling is a coral reef biologist, and they are both smashing it on Twitter. So I was really lucky to learn from them. So a lot of what you see today is what I've been taught informally. And it's an interesting thing because we're not trained to do this, but it is something that we're expected to do more. So it's a little bit of an informal learning network that we're creating here. First off first, what is Twitter? What does it look like? Here's a familiar face. So essentially Twitter, it's a microblogging site. You try and get information out in a very short, compressed space. So there's something like 280 character limits. It's similar to Facebook in the way that it's laid out. So this is essentially your home page. So this is Dr. Marilyn Jolino's home page. You've got your photo, you've got your profile, and what comes up in the middle is essentially everything that you've posted, and it becomes a running feed. So just a few of the basics, and then we'll get into it. Here's the Twitter user's real name, a thing which is, I don't know why, if anyone can tell me, please chime in, but we call it a handle on Twitter. That's essentially your username, and it's preceded by the @ symbol. Think about making it professional if you're going to be using it for professional purposes. So think a little bit about it because your real name doesn't come up. Your handle comes up when you're usually sharing information. On your homepage, you've got a description as well, which is also quite important and gives some thought to how you want to project yourself to the world as an academic. So usually who you're affiliated with, what your focal areas are, and usually a website link is really useful because the only reason I'm talking about using this is for professional purposes. I keep it separate from anything social media for personal. So if you're doing it for professional purposes, think a little bit about what's in your description there. This will be super obvious for everyone who's already on Twitter. This is an original tweet, so Marilyn's written this out. Thank you, blah, blah, blah. This is a retweeted comment, so those are the only two ways that you really communicate. There's others that you can respond, but primarily you're either typing something originally or you're just retweeting, which is resharing information. And then finally, there's a hashtag. So hashtags sort of are ubiquitous across social media. Essentially what they do is they group all the content on a particular topic under one, all under one space. So for example, we've started using ESRC publications. So if you click on that, every publication that comes out from our center will be grouped in one place. So it's just a way that we sort of cut through all the information because there's a lot. Just a show of hands, who's already on Twitter? Okay, cool. So a bit of a mixed bag, that's good. So that's sort of the basics of it. So next is why tweet. And also, full disclaimer, I've learned a lot of this from scientists who are doing it really well. That seems to be a good strategy. So Dr. Raul Pacheco-Vega is really active. He's got something like 30,000 followers. He's an extremely effective communicator, and he has lots of little tutorials online. So he's got one which is 5 ways in which Twitter can be useful. I'm presenting lucky number 13, so I've expanded a bit on what he shared, but some of my content is drawn from him. So 13 ways it can be useful for us. Number 1, as academics, we're expected to be really up to date on all the information that is being published in our particular area, but there's a lot. And so Twitter can actually be a shortcut to help you dig through everything that's coming out. You know, there's not that many other ways that you can have information specifically tailored to what you're interested in. So you follow researchers who are writing and tweeting about what you're particularly interested in, and it helps you sort of tailor your searches or tailor what you consume online. So as an example, in the spring last year, I was writing a book chapter on how local communities adapt to climate change. And Arun Agrawal, some of you are familiar with, he's one of the biggest thinkers in the field of natural resource management. You can get what he's thinking about that same day through Twitter. So he happened to tweet on May the 9th that World Development, which is one of the journals that he edits, had just put out a special feature on climate change adaptation. So then, delivered right to my desk as I opened up my computer, were 10 of the most cutting-edge papers on climate change adaptation as I'm writing about it. So this is like a gold mine for us as academics. It made sure that I'm relevant, and it helps us take shortcuts to keep on top of information. Number 2, it can help you build scholarly networks. So academics are not traditionally known as being the most charismatic people. We can be a little bit awkward. We can be a little bit introverted. And so if you're great in person, phenomenal. And we need to build networks face-to-face. But if you're an introvert, or if we don't have access to all these people in real life, you can build networks online in ways that are really, really useful for us. So as an example, Jennifer Silver is a researcher in my field. She's based in Guelph. I had corresponded with her through email once about her potentially supervising me. It didn't work out. I went to Australia, and I was sad that I wasn't working with her. So this is a conversation that happened on Twitter. I tweeted out, here's an important new paper that she's just published, and I linked it. And she said, thanks, how is it going in Australia? Are you planning to visit Canada? I responded, no, but I'd love to attend the Canadian Association of Geographers next year, their annual meeting. And then she said, oh, you should. I think it's in Halifax. Maybe we could organize a session. And that public Twitter conversation turned into a session that we then the following year actually hosted together, and it turned into a publication. So this researcher who I admired and wanted to work with but didn't have real access to transpired on Twitter. So that's an example of how you can actually network in real time with some of these people that you know, you get access to everybody. It's really fun. Number 3, it can help us refine how we're thinking about a particular research topic, or also a teaching topic, or maybe the way that you're TAing. So 2 examples is Dr. Raul Pacheco-Vega has said, political scientists, how do we measure the rule of law or the rule of compliance? And so instead of spending 2 or 3 days digging on Google Scholar or on the library website, he gets responses from his community online. So this guy has responded to him and said, oh, there's this transformation index. So you can actually ask your online community to help you refine your ideas or give you sort of shortcuts, which is awesome. Another one is this guy is asking, hey, does anyone have tips for how you make the most of a scientific conference? And those are the kinds of things that, if you look here, he's got 77 responses. So that means 77 people gave him tips on how you can actually be more effective at conferences. So there are ways for us to take shortcuts, which we can do on Twitter. Another way that it's useful to us is it can actually find collaborators. We can find collaborators more easily. So 2 quick examples. One is sort of when we're looking for collaborators. So I was hosting a special feature in Ecology and Society. We didn't have enough contributions through just our networks already, so we threw it out publicly. And so I said, for example, we're hosting this feature. Please get in touch if you'd like to submit. And I had 2 people directly contact me through Twitter, one of which ended up resulting in a paper in our feature. So that's a cool way that, again, you can access people you couldn't access before. And probably not super relevant this year, but definitely next year, is a great place to find jobs and job opportunities. So most of the ones that come up in my feed are postdoc opportunities, because that's sort of the area I was in. But you can tailor who you're following so that you get information that's really relevant to you, and you can find great opportunities online. Number 5 is a really nice part of Twitter, actually. So the web can be kind of a negative place, but it can also be a real source of comfort. So on Twitter, you can obtain and provide emotional support, and it's no secret anymore that grad school is one of the most stressful and challenging times in our lives. And there's a lot of nice ways that you can sort of find comfort through your community. So it can be funny stuff. For example, hello from my aesthetically pleasing personal writing hell. Like, that's a place that we find ourselves in, and it's often quite isolating, but you can get support online. And I just wanted to point out that she's used this PhD chat hashtag, and there's a lot of really great ones for graduate students. So PhD chat's good. ECR is early career researcher chat. Another one is academic writing, you know, when you're banging your head against the wall trying to write. Other people out in the Twitter sphere are also doing the same thing, so you can get support that way. It can get to the more serious stuff. So mental illness is rife in academia, and it's becoming a bit more normalized, and we're talking about it more. So there's stuff like this. If you're affected by mental illness, you're not alone. There can be light. And a link to an article in Nature magazine. So they're kind of publishing about that kind of stuff. And then back to sort of the lighter ones. Isabel Cote is a researcher in British Columbia. She's a senior scientist. She's massive in her field. And her papers get rejected, and she shares it, and it makes me feel better. So she said, "We regret that your manuscript," so this is quoting a response that she's gotten from a journal, "We regret that it doesn't meet our stringent criteria, which are based on content, importance, and originality. We would like to point out that our decision is not based on the quality of your paper." So when I'm feeling just so down because my big idea has been rejected, I find comfort that everyone else is in the same game, and it can be good. To get more at academic conferences or grad school, so surprise, you will recognize yourselves here. So this is a photo of the welcome lunch that we had a couple weeks ago. But it's a nice way to actually continue conversations that are happening. So if anyone is online, I posted this to say, look, here's what we're doing. But I also posted a link, which is an article on the art of navigating graduate school published in Science. So it's a nice way to sort of continue conversations or dig deeper if you want. Another really nice way is when you're at a conference, there's actually a whole back conference happening online. And when I went to my first resilience conference, I wasn't on Twitter, and everyone was talking about it, and I felt really left out, and I was actually missing out on these important conversations that were happening behind the scenes. So when I went to the next one, last year I was there in Stockholm for the Resilience Conference. We were using this hashtag Resilience Frontiers, but they actually asked people at the conference to use the Meet Resilience Frontiers hashtag to sort of increase the way that we were actually talking to one another. There were about 2,000 people at the conference. It's hard to navigate. So I posted this up before my talk, which is what my talk was going to be about. Maybe it was a Star Wars graphic. But I had people actually come to my talk that wouldn't have seen it otherwise because they're browsing through a brochure of 2,000 other talks. You know, so it's a way that we can engage and actually get more out of these face-to-face meetings. One reason to engage is you're on Twitter even if you're not on Twitter. So here's an example of a tweet that came out on the 24th of September by our colleague Derek Armitage. And he said, on World Water Day, I'm reminded of a float trip down the beautiful Saugeen River with the always amazing Ryan Plummer. And so this is a bit of a joke, but it's also serious because if you, Twitter allows us to word search just like everything else on the web. And it doesn't have to be just with the @ symbol. You can word search any words, including people's names, and they're often writing about you before you're even on there. So I found that before I joined Twitter, there was comments on a talk I'd given that I wasn't even aware of. So that's just a flag for you. You don't have to participate. You're probably already online. I already showed a picture of you guys, so you're there. You're on the web. Number 8 is to share resources in an environment of scarcity. So we're quite fortunate to be at Brock, and we have access to a lot of online journals, but we don't have access to everything. And our colleagues, I love that you brought up the issue of equity. Our colleagues who are not at such affluent universities don't necessarily have access. So one of the ways that Twitter is helping people is they're actually sharing PDFs back and forth. So for example, this Chris Smith has asked, do any of my sea turtle tweets, which is what we call each other, it's super nerdy, have the following PDFs? And then people actually responded with links or said, I'll email it to you. And so this can I has hashtag is like a bit of a cheeky, like, can I have whatever. We've turned it into, like, we've made it dorky, can I has the PDF. And it's not just something that happens, well, it starts sort of informally amongst Twitter people, but it can actually turn into real stuff. So Nature Communications a couple of years ago picked up that that was a hashtag that academics were using, and perhaps, I'm not sure, but they've actually made all of their journals open access. So these are conversations that we have amongst ourselves, but they're also influential, and they can shape the way that we access information. Number 9 is to engage as appropriate in social movements that are happening. So things like World Water Day or the International Women's Day. This is an example of a hashtag that was going around last year called Actual Living Scientists. So in response to all the cuts that were happening south of the border to science programs in particular, and the attacks that were really directed at researchers and at our research programs, scientists sort of were reacting back by trying to normalize and bring some credibility to us as individuals through this hashtag. So it was going around and just trying to say, look, we're real people, we're genuine, we're trying to be transparent, and it was a way that I tried to engage with that siege or sort of attack that was happening on science. So the thing that you did was you said your name, you used the hashtag, and then you tried to say in layman's terms what you're actually focusing on to try and get us out of our sort of ivory towers. I love that you brought fun into it. Academia can be pretty fun, but there's definitely room, sarcasm, there's definitely room to make it a little bit more playful whenever we possibly can. So Twitter is a place where people are a little bit funnier than they might be, or they're a little bit more cheeky, and it can be fun. So this is a picture that came out of an IUCN conference that was happening last year, and they said it was a social science selfie, and then we responded with our own social science selfie, and like, these are pretty serious people that don't cut loose too much, so whenever we can have fun, this is like one of the ways that it can be enjoyable. Another one is this Spielberg fail hashtag is a constant source of entertainment for me. It's a little bit dated now, but it's like if you're just stuck and you need a break, go and check these ones out. So there's stuff like, so it is a bit dated. They actually turned it into a book of cartoons. Accidentally glued myself to a crocodile while attaching a radio transmitter, and that kind of stuff. Or this one's great, and this one just came out a couple months ago. When fillet lizards are released, they immediately run up the nearest tallest object for safety. It's usually a tree. In this case, it was me. And so it's a nice way to bring some light to our serious days as researchers. Number 10 is that it's actually becoming a research topic in and of itself, and it's this metric thing. Does anyone care? Is it useful? Is it making a difference? So some researchers who are specialists in other areas are starting to engage with Twitter and how it's actually effective or not in communicating what we do. So this is a colleague of mine, Emily Darling, and here's Isabel Cote, that researcher, and they were looking at how does Twitter affect the life cycle of a publication. And it's been cited, it's now up at 140 citations. So this stuff is getting picked up, and people are actually engaging with it as a serious mechanism to communicate our science. Another one, and I love that you touched on this, Jayne, is we need to promote our research. And this quote I love, it makes me laugh every time. Passive dissemination, which occurs when authors simply hope that their work will be discovered, is a pretty poor strategy. Like, nobody's going on Google Scholar except a few of our peers that are in a very focused area. So we need other ways to get our work out, not only to the scientific community, but to the broader audience. So these are some of the ways that I try and promote my work. So for example, Sustainable protein is key for food security. Our new paper is looking how aquaculture is spreading amongst people in Solomon Islands, and a link to the paper. Or are you collaborating? Everybody's collaborating. Our new paper suggests 5 principles for successful collaboration, that kind of thing. And it's a way I have some of the numbers, but it does actually broaden the reach of who is actually looking at your papers and who is picking them up and reading them. This is a really nice one, and this sort of comes back to the equity thing that Jayne talked about. This is a way that we actually have control of to try and level some of these playing fields. So one of the things that you can do is promote the work of less visible scholars. So that can be early career scholars, as we're trying to fight to get a little voice in the conversation that's quite dominated by big names, or women in science, or particular minorities. And so one of the things that I read somewhere, and some of my colleagues and I have done, is we put a note in our calendar once a month to make sure that we're promoting the work of somebody who's a less visible person. So whether that be my early career colleagues or my women in science colleagues, we're trying to do it. So this was one that came up. I got a reminder to myself. My friend Kat Mids is trained as a science communicator, so I flagged it and thought, oh yeah, I need to remember to write something. So she just put out a blog post, and I gave it a little bit of visibility. Rashid Somalia is a massive researcher from UBC. He's got a lot of influence and a lot of sway, and so he's promoting these early career Filipino scientists that are working with him, so he's sort of giving some visibility to their group. And again, Isabel Cote, I just like her style, so I guess I go back to her quite a bit. But she was at a conference, and she's saying, go to this talk. It'll knock your socks off. This person is my new favorite science communication star. Sorry, this is blurry. But it's just a nice way that we can actually, have a little bit of influence, and it's a little bit of a way to give these different groups a bit of a bump. The final of my 13 points why it's good is it allows us to communicate with a broader audience. And so this is a really neat paper that Emily Darling and Isabel Cote just published. It came out this year. And what they did was they looked at how many followers you had, and then they looked at who you were actually talking to. So this is I love this. This is an infographic that she drew by hand. So you don't have to have like a high fancy communication team to do infographics well. If you've got a bit of flair, you can do them on your own for free. So if you've got 100 followers, you're just talking to each other. It's mostly your friends who are in grad school. It's sort of bouncing around. If you've got 500 followers, you're still mostly speaking to scientists, but you're starting to get some of these outreach groups. Then 1,000 followers seems to be the threshold point, after which you start talking to more than half of your followers are non-scientists. And so that's one of our goals, is trying to get these conversations beyond just the ivory tower. So here you're starting to talk to politicians, you're starting to talk to media outlet, you're starting to talk to the general public. And then another interesting thing is if even once you're up at the 2,500 plus, it doesn't change that much. So there seems to be a bit of a threshold point around 1,000 followers where we can start actually talking to these broader audiences, which is pretty cool. So those are my 13 points on why it can be useful to us. Next, I'll just give you a few reflections on how you develop a really strong online presence. And I'm going to do this through a list of do's and don'ts, some of which are hilarious but happen all the time. So let's start with do. So this was what I learned from Jody Rummer and Emily Darling 5 years ago, and it was the best advice I ever got for how do you actually engage. They said you need to develop a brand, and that doesn't mean you're trying to sell a product or you're selling yourself out. What you're doing is saying, I'm an expert in these areas, or these are my focal points that I will be talking about. So if someone wants to follow you, they know that they're going to get content on a few particular topics, and that's why people want to follow you for professional reasons as an academic. So generally, it's a good idea to pick 2 to 3 kind of academic-y topics, and you can also include sort of 1 to 2 other topics if you'd like. So for example, Emily's got 5,600 followers. She's massive. She's a really great scientist. She's a really great communicator as well. So she primarily tweets about her research, which is coral reef ecology, perhaps coral reef fisheries ecology. But she's also become a bit of an expert on Twitter. So she writes about Twitter as well and science communication. So if you read her description, which I apologize, it's a bit blurry, she's a World Conservation Society scientist thinking about coral reefs, fisheries, climate change, big data, and how to tweet about it. So she's summarized right there. If you want to be kept up to date on what's happening sort of on the forefront of these issues, then that's why you would go to her. And that's a really important strategy. Sort of ask yourself, why would people follow you and what are you going to be talking about? Because if it's all over the place, people will stop coming there for information on a particular thing. The rest of my do's are kind of smushed into one. And this is just my personal bias, but it's based on 5 years of thinking about it and observing it. These are some tips for how you make really useful, successful, sort of perfect tweets. So, in my opinion, 280 characters is not enough to inform your audience about a particular topic. So you always want to include a link. So it's a little bit of a soundbite to say, look, this new thing has just come out or this conference is happening. Then you always have a link so your readers can then go and follow up on it. Otherwise, it's a bit of a dead end and 280 characters, like not a lot of space. Use a photo. There's so much information on the web, and when people are on Twitter, they're just scrolling, and each little box comes up as a white writing box. If there's a picture, it gets a lot more traction. It can be a photo, it can be an infographic, it can be a hand-drawn picture, but try and use a photo because it will increase the visibility or the likelihood that people will stop and actually look at what you're talking about. Jayne already used this really nicely, but use plain language. Don't write like an academic. I found if I was trying to explain why a paper came out and why it was useful to my friend over coffee, that's how I try and put it in my tweet. So I try and say, look, so are you trying to measure resilience? The Stockholm Resilience Center just introduced this guide. It's a 5-step process for how you actually assess, plan, and take action around resilience, and it's so good. So when you write in that kind of language, your academic peers are also just people who are also trying to filter through, and if you can make the language a little bit more clear and engaging, it's a good way to go. Mix original and retweeted content. So people are going to be perceiving your brand as they read your stuff. And if you're too much like, look at me, it's annoying, and people are turned off by that particular brand. So you have to promote other people's work, and you have to be sort of complimentary and a good colleague in your presence online as well. Beware the Kim Kardashian index. There's an index which is, if you're all fluff and no substance, then that means your Kim Kardashian index is really high. If you're just like, oh, I'm doing great stuff and all this, it's bad, and people perceive it poorly, and it's not going to serve you well in communicating well about your work. Okay. My top 5 Twitter don'ts. Don't go crazy and get personal or political. Maybe Facebook is the place for that, maybe some other place, but if you're using Twitter for a professional account, it doesn't belong there. There's a few prominent scientists who go on these weird political rants, and if it's not directly related to your particular topic matter, this is not the venue for it. Don't engage with negative comments. The internet has lots of sort of crazy people. There's trolls. You won't get it at first, but as you get more and more followers, you will get negative comments. Take it as a compliment that you've reached a certain threshold, but don't engage because there's really no good that can come of it. So just let those go when you become Twitter rock stars and people start negatively commenting. Don't take shortcuts. This used to read "Don't be lazy," but I thought that was mean. Proofread all your stuff before it goes live. We know of some prominent politicians who have had some embarrassing typos recently. I've done this too. Make sure you reread it. Make sure you also check your hashtags. So this was a blender that I made. I was leading our seminar series for the Coral Reef Center a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, we'll have a hashtag for our talks, it'll be great, we'll call it Coral Talk, which I didn't check, and then when I went online after, I realized that someone was selling coral necklaces with the hashtag Coral Talk, so mixed in with all our academic talks about coral were these coral necklaces, which was ridiculous because I shortcut. So check your hashtags, check your links to make sure they actually work, because there's nothing worse than publishing a tweet and then people start saying, oh, we can't actually, the link is broken. So just, proofread. Don't use shock value photos. That's sort of just common sense things, the way that, the sort of the grandparent or the parent rule. Don't publish anything publicly that you wouldn't want your family or your grandparents reading. Also, even if your accounts are private, there is a way that these things always seem to get out. So just think about whatever you're putting out there is going to be out there for good. So just be polished and professional. Also, your Twitter followers fluctuate, and it can be upsetting. I am always very sad when I realize I've lost 30 people. I'm like, oh, what am I doing? But use it as an opportunity to reflect on how you're branding, what you're talking about. Why are people following you? Why are they perhaps disinterested in you? Did I go on a political rant and then I lost 15 people because it was inappropriate for my particular topic? Just sort of be reflective on how you're communicating. So just 2 points on navigating the details. There's lots of stuff, and feel free to email me if you've got questions or we could have a meeting about it, but just a few things that will be useful to you. One of the features I wanted to point out is that you can pin tweets, and that's really good for us as scientists because it means that at the top of your page, the same tweet is always going to be there. And so for us as academics, it's good to pin your most recent paper. So this came out in July. It's my newest paper, and I stuck it to the top of my page, so anyone who goes there is going to see it. So it gives you a bit of control on the content and what people actually see. And then the final point, which relates to the question that you guys were talking about, is does this stuff matter and can we actually measure it? Twitter collects all the data on how you're tweeting, and whether or not you think that's good, it's always happening online anyway, but they give us access to it, so it can help us learn how we're doing and how people are engaging with our stuff. So when you go to your profile, if you click on the little arrow next to it, there's a drop-down menu, and one of them is Analytics. So you click on Analytics, and you get these monthly summaries of how you're doing. So you can see which tweets really went crazy and got a lot of traction, which ones fell flat and nobody liked them. You can see how much you're tweeting. My impressions are going badly this month, but so I can learn what's going on there, how many people visited your profile, how many times you've been mentioned, and that kind of thing. And just a few notes on what this stuff actually means. An impression, which is one of the metrics they use, is just how many times your tweet showed up in people's feeds. So that is sort of a passive way that people are engaging with it. An engagement means they've actually clicked on it. So you've actually gotten people to engage. They've gone to your link or they've retweeted it or something like that. So if we're trying to be science communicators through social media, this is really what we're going for. So you can see which ones are getting engagements, which ones are not. And this is sort of a minor detail, but on Twitter, there's you can like something or you can retweet something. Those are the two ways that you can kind of interact. A like means that people are kind of appreciative of your content. A retweet means that they think it's valuable for their followers, and so they're actually resharing your information. So this is what we're really going for if we're trying to be science communicators. So we want to be looking at our analytics and understanding what are people engaging with and when are they retweeting our content so that we can be effective with our Twitter accounts. Oh, that brings me to the end, but I just did want to say, when we are trying to demonstrate impact, some of this stuff used to be a little bit fluffy, but we are starting to be evaluated on alt metrics. So alt metrics is an acronym for alternative metrics. So as academics, it used to be just how many papers have you published and how many citations have you gotten. Those are it. But now we're realizing that that is not completely representative of our effectiveness as researchers. So alt metrics are things like how many times have your papers been picked up on social media sites? How many reads are you getting on these online platforms like Mendeley? And those types of metrics are actually becoming part of our formal evaluations as well. And so it's becoming an important way that we are also being evaluated as researchers. I believe that brings me to the end. So just like Jayne said, if you'd like to email, feel free, or if you'd like to have a meeting about it. I'm sort of learning as I go. These are a bit of sort of informal learning networks, but I find it really fun, and I found it to be quite effective. So thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a personal Twitter profile. Yeah. And it's helpful to handle that. How do I combine that with professional profile? Is it possible to do that?
That's a great idea. That's a great question. So this is my opinion. I believe they should be separate. So what I would recommend is creating a second account, which is just for your academic use. So the only trick then is going to be if people search you by name, they will find both accounts. So you just want to make sure that your description is quite clear, that this is you're a graduate student in sustainability science, and that description will let people know if they want to follow you, that would be the profile that they should follow. Yeah, I'm happy to hear other people's opinions on it, but I think it can get a bit messy when you've got the personal and the professional mixed together. So I tend to pick one platform for my personal stuff and one for my professional.
I'm just curious how long, you said you haven't had Twitter for that long, 5 years.
My Twitter anniversary.
How long would you say like it took for when you got Twitter to where you feel like you had like somewhat of a following, I guess?
It's sort of this mysterious thing where there seems to be threshold marks where you get bumped. So initially you start and you just get followers from the people who know you within your institution. One way that I've noticed that you get serious bumps is when you go to conferences, for example. So you're in amongst your peers and you're communicating with them, and that seems to be a way. So I'd say it's sort of been chucking along slowly. There's also, it's so unfair, you know, we're so judgmental. You can see someone who has very few followers and you think, oh, they're not that influential, maybe I won't follow them. And then you see someone who has like 1,000 plus and you're like, oh, people are following them. So there's this sort of weird peer pressure thing with it. But I think if you follow those sort of principles on how to do it well, you will see your followers just start to creep up over time, and then you get these sort of bump points. This is a random story, but one of my friends who is a brilliant researcher, also a brilliant artist, she's just one of those talented people, her Twitter profile had a scuba diving mask, so you couldn't see her face, and her background photo was sand, which is like so ugly and boring. And I said, I challenge you, she was somewhere around like 400 followers. I said, I bet you within a month I can get you to 500 if we just change your profile picture and your background photo, and it worked. And so I don't know if it was entirely the photos, but if you're doing it well and it's polished and it's good content, you'll see it rise.
How often do you post?
That's a good question too. If you're not interacting too much, just sort of trickle off. So I try and post maybe once a day. I tend to go on once or twice a day. So that's a good thing too, is to keep in mind, like, you don't want it, if it's something that's not intuitive or not useful, you don't want to sink time into it, because again, it's not your bread and butter. It's not the core of what we do. It's not your thesis. So it's an add-on essentially. So yeah, I go on once or twice a day and just have a quick flick through. I almost always find a paper that's useful to me, so I find it good, and then I try and, most days I just retweet somebody else's, like someone that has just published a new paper, I think it'll be useful to the people in my field, so I just retweet it. Yeah.
In that line of thought, I've become very aware of my own poor time management as of late, as I'm sure many of us have.
Yeah.
If you have separate Twitter profiles and then other social media that you're dealing with, I think it's very easy to sink an hour or two per day into social media.
Yep.
But if you're also sleeping 8 hours a day, that's 4 months of your year. 2 hours a day is a month of your time every year. How much time do you actually spend on Twitter? And in that consideration, do you also factor in just flipping through it in the middle of the afternoon between meetings, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that is something that you have to just resolve individually, because each of us will have a certain set of trade-offs around time management that is useful for us. But I have found, particularly as an early career researcher, this has given me access to people I wouldn't have had before, and I get interaction from big names in my field on my little papers. So to me, the benefits outweigh the time that I spend on it, but I am very careful with my time. So I have a rule that I don't go on personal social media during the workday. I try and keep my workday quite fixed. And then I do try and go on maybe once in the morning and once in the afternoon for like 10 minutes at most. I try and keep it quite brief. Because otherwise, you know, it's the black hole of the internet. You can go forever. Yeah.
I noticed you had on your second last slide about advertisements and being able to promote through payment options. Have you explored any of those avenues, and is that a strategy that academics use or not so much?
Feel free to chime in on that.
I know we use it for recruitment. So
that's what's driving my question.
We pay. We have something called Growing with Rock, which is a research participant database. That's just a couple of researchers that paid in to make that, and then they pay for Twitter and Facebook ads saying, "Hi, this study's going on. We need people between the ages of 20 and 30." And our database has jumped from like 400 to now I think we're at 1,500 people in the database over like now paying for like Facebook ads and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's worked for us, but it's for recruitment.
Yeah, so I've never engaged with that, and I found that can be effective without jumping to that next sort of level of visibility. So the promoted thing is just only on your content. You pin the top tweet. That's it. It doesn't make it go out to a certain audience. It's only people that come to you. So I haven't gone down that path yet.
Yeah. Just an observation. So these social media things are always in a state of flux. So if I wanted to reach out to, say, the younger crowd, then something like Instagram might be better. If I wanted to reach out to a different age group, Twitter might be. Facebook snowballs, and they move and they change, and they're really hard.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely always in a state of flux. Like fieldwork fail is sadly gone now. It's like 3 years ago, and that's like ancient history online. And absolutely, you want to think about your audience and who's using which platform. That's why I find Twitter is useful for me, because Instagram doesn't allow you to have the same sort of content engagement about a written piece of work that Twitter does. So scientists don't engage with Instagram the way they do. You know, they still do at an institutional kind of level if you want to have lots of photos, but you can have photos on Twitter as well. So for me, because who I'm trying to talk to are my peers and also journalists interested in research, this is the right platform. It's true, though, in 10 years from now or 5 years from now or 1 year from now, maybe Twitter won't be the place anymore. But a lot of these skills about being professional, thinking through your messaging, those will be transferable skills to whatever platform comes next.
I know you said one of your don'ts was like, if you're losing followers, don't be sad about that, and to reflect on your branding. So if you were reflecting on it, would you then like have you lost followers before that you noticed?
Yes.
Do you like change things that you're doing, or like?
No, but I think I polished it up. So when I first started, I was trying to be like really cheeky, and then I realized that I'm not that funny, so I just need to not do that. So I realized that didn't work for me. So I guess that's what I mean by reflecting on your branding. You know, I see what people really like, and it's when I'm just genuine and when I just say, look, this is interesting, it's relevant for the research I do, that gets the best response. So I try and think that through, and I sort of try and use my analytics to understand that. But yeah, that's been my experience.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Blythe. Why don't we just give her a round of applause, guys? So I just personally thought the 13 items was really interesting, especially number 8. So I think Yes We Can has PDF. Yeah, I mean, I think this is really going to have us thinking that we should be all Twitter rock stars, even if we're a little bit out of our comfort zone. So yeah, thank you once again, and thank you everyone for coming to the transdisciplinary seminar. And I believe we're going to have our next one on the 17th. Is that right? Yeah. So join us on the 17th. Thank you so much.
Thanks.